So welcome everyone. It's lovely to have you all online and to be with us for the COVID-19 Mastermind Roadmap to the New Normal. We're so fortunate to have Erin Corner here. She's an amazing strategic mind, and her experience and her insights are going to be absolutely fabulous. But before I hand over to Erin, I'd just like to share with you a little bit about BWA, and anyone who's interested more in membership or how to partner with us. After the Q&A that follows Erin's presentation, I'm happy to share more information on that. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me either on LinkedIn or through the Businesswomen Australia website, and we can take it from there. So before we actually start, I would like just to acknowledge the country in which we're all meeting in various places around Australia. We are meeting and gathering on land where First Nations people lived, worked, danced and cared for, celebrating for over 60,000 years, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we acknowledge and support our Indigenous sisters in business. It's been a really dividing time the last few weeks with the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that certainly Businesswomen Australia is very cognizant of sorry business, and we really do hope that people can have the opportunity to share their stories and for truth-telling to occur. A bit about BWA. We came together about 4 or 5 years ago now to come up with an idea around a national collective of women who we felt were sort of the forgotten levels of women, those not only in business on their own, but also those that are in executive, CEO and board roles, as a way of bringing a melting pot of people and ideas together. We aim to be the #1 national collaborative community in Australia, and we're very much focused on the success of women in business and raising the profile of women in business. We achieve that vision by really helping each other, and that is that collaborative piece around doing things together in a similar way that Erin and I have got together to put this on. All our knowledge experts come generally from within our community, and we really are determined to build a network of influence, creating that opportunities for business women, no matter where they might be across states, professions and sectors. So the BWA Collective, as I said, isn't just business owners. It is also directors, executives, managers in organisations, professionals, consultants. We've got a good mix of C-suite women and women on boards, leaders and emerging leaders, including students and interns. I'd like to thank our sponsors and partners. Catco Enterprises have just rebuilt our website. Kathy Smith is amazing. Any of you that's looking for an awesome web development team or digital marketing team to outsource to some elements of your work, this team are fabulous. In my role, I have a marketing consulting business, and I actually have used Kathy and the team for some of my clients' work as well, so I highly recommend them. Solo Accounts, we have Donna Vincent joining us today. She's a founder, probably Australia's first fintech entrepreneur. She also is heavily involved with Businesswomen Australia. She's actually our accounts manager here, and we love Solo Accounts. A lot of women that go out into business on their own are solo entrepreneurs that have come out of corporate and set up their business. And we love Solo Accounts because it's a really easy bookkeeping system. It spits out our BAS numbers and makes our accounting very easy to do without the expensive cost and the complexity of the double entry bookkeeping systems like Xero and Quicken and so on. Inspiration Source, we do our courageous conversations with. Intact Teams, we love. Jessica Schubert's just joined as our Director of Learning and Development. And Platinum Mix, we have fabulous roundtable sessions with Becky Sangster. And we have also, of course, 3 Drops who help us with our wine, which is a very important part of our sponsorship. LG Accounting Solutions that host many of our events. Pauline Bright Business, who also facilitates masterminds, and Evolving Women, who Cindy Turner started up our BWA in Sunshine Coast. So we're in Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and Bunbury, and we've restarted our Mandurah practice. So we are definitely busy people. So if you'd like to be a part of what we're doing, to sponsor an event, present a topic or host a gathering, to be a part of our group as one of our thought leaders, I'd love to hear your ideas about how you'd like to engage. For those of you that are on social, we do have a company page. We'd love you to follow it. We'd also love you to join our LinkedIn group. It's free to join. That's a great way to keep in the loop. We have a website with all our events in the directory, in the calendar. We have a directory listing externally facing of all our members. So if you're looking for a female to support and refer to, we'd love you to use our directory. We've got women across all categories and sectors and states. We've got a very, very popular Facebook page, I think followed by 8,000 or 9,000 people, and a private group for members to share ideas, thoughts, opinions, ask for help. We've got a Twitter handle and we're on Instagram, and our hashtags, we generally use a hashtag BWA events and hashtag BWA leaders. I'm not going to go through what's coming up. You can have a look at that on the website. We have a majority of our events online, and I'd just like to hand over to Erin. Erin, I've known since KPMG days. We worked together in the marketing team. I was the state marketing manager here at KPMG, and Erin was my 2IC, and I did want her to take over that role, but she disappeared to the West Australian and Intermedia. She's one of the most commercially minded marketing professionals I know. Her career has spanned 40 categories, more than that, and more than 50 companies because of her media creative agency experience and the work that she's done in that space. She's a tech entrepreneur. She's had her own startup with the Bake Swap app and the work that she's done in that space. But more importantly, she's an absolute specialist when it comes to the importance of reputation, crisis management and brand within the strategic process of an organisation. She's really has had incredible experience in that area, and I'm sure she'll be drawing on that in terms of being able to share her framework today and being able to sort of help us make sense of what we can learn from the lessons of COVID and how that might assist us strategically going forward. So I will stop sharing now and allow Erin to take over from here. And I'd just like to thank you all for being here with us today. It's really wonderful to have such a great supportive group of Erin and some fabulous members. We record these, our members get access to these in our back end, but Erin's community will also be able to access this if they haven't been able to stay on for the full time. So over to you, fabulous Erin.
I muted that whole time. That was the best bit. That was by far the best bit too. Sorry about that. It's very kind. That was a really kind introduction and very nice to have the opportunity to share something I'm so passionate about. The thing about crisis management is that the skills and the tools that you use in this space are actually really transferable to any kind of challenge that a business faces. So while we do find ourselves in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, the sorts of things that we're learning, the lessons that we can take from it, and how we translate those into strategic inputs to the roadmap forward are the same sorts of tools and methodologies and the approach we can use for any kind of challenge that crops up in a business. And that's the one certainty in business, is that there's always going to be some sort of challenge, some sort of curveball, or actually just some sort of beautiful, big, beastly opportunity that you really want to make the most of. So I hope that what we share today, you'll see is not just specific to COVID-19, not a single purpose kind of thought. The other thing that when I was talking to Lynn about doing this was to share it sort of in a methodology kind of way, the sort of way that you could not just listen to me for, 40 minutes or whatever, but actually that there would be things from this that you could take and use back in your own organisations. And I'm aware that we have an amazing group of people, really talented people, who will be doing a huge amount of work in the space of creating that forward strategy, taking what has been what you have learned in your own organisations or with your clients during the whole COVID-19 thing. You'll be doing that now. And I'm not assuming that you're not doing that. I think there are many people who for the very first time have been forced into this brand recovery space. And certainly a lot of people have brilliant skills that will make them really successful at that. I think what I've got to offer is this isn't my first rodeo. So I've been working in the brand recovery space for a long time. So I have skills like many of you do, but I also have the experience to bring to that. So if I can be of help, then I'm really happy to be of help. I've tried to also make the approach really simple. That's deliberate. I think the simplest things actually work best rather than getting caught up in, really heavy kind of text and, pithy methodologies. What I hope you take from this is one of three things today. I know when I sit and listen to something like this, sometimes for me it's just the pure joy of having 45 minutes to just sit and think, to hear something that inspires me to think and to have the space to do that for that amount of time. The second thing I hope you take away is maybe there's something that you'll be able to action. Maybe you'll be able to action many things. And the third thing I hope you take away is that if there is some way that I can help you do some of these things or all of these things, then I'm very happy to do so. So let's look at this cute little word cloud. These are all the sorts of things that, these will be very familiar terms. You'll have heard them a bazillion times. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of these sorts of things will have turned up in communication that you'll have received or communication you'll have produced or sent. And we really need to be thinking about, what that looks like moving forward and the relevance, if you like. There's a lot of confusion and anxiety. And when you look at all of these sorts of terms displayed like this, you can see why. It just makes you can feel anxious just looking at that. There has been a lot of confusion. There has been a lot of anxiety. And it's up to many of us in this space to help help people find a way through that and reduce that anxiety. While a catastrophe like this one often comes along only once in a lifetime, challenges and crises are just a part of corporate life. So if we can come out of this with a new preparedness to handle anything that comes our way, then I think that's going to be a great thing for everyone. And Christy was talking to us at the start of the session about how in her role, she's a really talented professional in the space of internal comms, and actually what's happened during the crisis is there's been a completely new appreciation for the role that internal comms needs to play in navigating a company there in the healthcare space through this kind of crisis. And I think that's been true for a lot of people. A lot of some of these things that we do have now been recognised as essential or critical even to business success. So that's a real positive in that space. I'm going to do the presentation in three parts today because that way I think it best reflects the way that we would run this as a workshop if we came and did this with you, for instance. The first part of the process would be looking at capturing actionable insights. So this is the opportunity to really sit down and think about all of the learnings that we've had. And I'm going to talk to you about how to give that some focus and some meaning rather than it just be a massive laundry list of stuff. The second part of the workshop or the methodology, if we were to come and do this, would be to triage those so that you really do get that laser sharp alignment with business strategy. So it's all well and good to capture a whole slew of learnings, but if you can't actually then use them to drive long-term success and profitability, then it was really a really nice exercise to do, but it's not really going to have the value that it should in your organisation. And last but not least, by going through this exercise, it really does underpin the opportunity to achieve a new level of preparedness for this kind of thing moving forward. Let's hope it's never something like COVID again, but it'll be something. COVID's the current crisis, but it's not your next one. So if we move directly into part A, I like to start with what the learning outcome is. So the two key things to take out of this are a shared language across all key stakeholder groups. You'll have a raft of very diverse stakeholder groups, and everybody will be experiencing different things, exposed to different parts of the experience, and have their own view of it. And it's really important that all of those things are able to be brought together. So there is a shared understanding and a shared language. Some of that's going to become more, the reason why is actually going to become more obvious as time goes on. I'd like to start with this fantastic quote. This really is it's a quote we use in almost every single thing that we do here at the Reputation Continuum, because it plays to this idea of reputation as a continuum. The idea that learnings come from history or the things that we've done, but they're only useful if they actually help guide us in doing what's next. And I'd like to talk to you briefly about the idea of reputation as the heartbeat of your business, okay? A healthy heartbeat obviously has variations or blips, if you like, along the way. For obvious reasons, it can't be a flat line or you're in a bit of trouble. These blips are designed to represent the interactions that people have with you, the experience that people have with you and your brand. The metaphor here is not intended to reflect the COVID-19 experience. The metaphor here is designed to reflect your particular experience as a business or a brand. So your pattern is going to be very unique to you. And the way that, for instance, COVID-19 is affecting you and the way that you're responding to that is going to dictate the way that your heartbeat, if you like, or your reputation either prospers or suffers during that process. Sometimes the beat is very arrhythmic. Sometimes it's a whole cluster of little things, depending on what's going on. Sometimes there are bigger things. Sometimes it's a nice, smooth pattern. Like the COVID curve, generally the more regular the pattern and the flatter the curve, the healthier the reputation, and really healthy reputations enable you to prosper in fair weather and foul. But this was the concept, if you like, that my business was founded upon. And, you know, there's more information on that on our site, and I could talk for hours about that, but I'm going to leave that there at this moment in time. I think the key thing I want people to take out of this is the idea of reputation as a commercial measure. Okay, so I think it's very easy, particularly at exec and board level, for these sorts of things to be seen as soft measures and something the marketing people do. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the marketing people, I'm one of those people, but reputation is very much a commercial measure. It is absolutely influenced by and part, and it impacts everything and is influenced by everything. And it is very important to have those conversations, and we do that at board level to make sure that reputation risk is actually taken seriously in the risk management framework in a business. And often that's a new sort of conversation. They think it's about the comms, and it really isn't. It isn't about the comms. I'd like to introduce you to another one of our favourite tools at the Reputation Continuum. His name is Retro. He's a retrospecticorn. See what I did there? He is, you often hear people say, if someone just invented that retrospectoscope, I mean, they just make a fortune. The ability to actually, you know, see what was going to happen before it did, to go back in time and change things. Why he's a unicorn, why we use him, is because it is, you can uncover absolutely dazzling insights by looking back at key learnings through periods of time. But it's very, very important that there are any glances back and that there is forward momentum. And a really good way of thinking about that is if you're hurtling down the freeway at 110 kilometres an hour, you do need to glance in your rearview mirror from time to time. But you can't turn around and look in it. You actually need to keep your eyes on the road and keep looking forward, and just glance back when you need to get some sort of information from behind you that actually helps you stay focused and keep that forward momentum as you move into the next phase of whatever it is that you are doing. Makes it easy for us to remember. Now, the learning curve, I don't think anybody would disagree about the steepness and the number of curves in the learning curve that we've all experienced in recent times. But I think now, I mean, I do honestly feel that living in Australia, and particularly living in Perth, we're incredibly lucky. We've done so well in the way that we've managed this, and that everybody's worked together to be where we are now. So it is appropriate. There is a great opportunity here to see this as an opportunity. What was incredible, I sat in a KPMG presentation a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about the accelerated pace of technological adoption, and one of the ways that kind of showed up was having to suddenly have a completely dispersed workforce, everybody working remotely, everybody working off their home internet servers and systems, and the huge amount of risk that those sorts of things open us up to. Risk you have to just set to one side at the time, because you actually just have to respond and behave in the way that works best at that time. And in COVID, that was, one day suddenly people had to start working from home. So not only was there this accelerated pace, but all of these new things we had to do. And during that session, we talked about the fact that some of those things would often take months or years to actually get across the line in normal times. And by then, they'd probably be quite redundant as concepts. So by the time you'd actually gone through the whole process, they'd be redundant. You'd start back at the beginning. So the beautiful advantage of this learning curve was we've actually been forced into, or had the opportunity to do things that we've always wanted to, but have been held back by our existing protocols. And then if that wasn't enough, we were further tested by the constant twists and turns. We didn't just get COVID and have to respond to it. It felt like it changed every day for a while there, every week. So certainly everybody's had a lot to deal with. This sort of slide is the one I would use in a workshop to give context. So as we're leading into how we start to uncover or surface insights or key learnings, it helps to actually have some of the more relevant businesses, if you like, to your particular situation. And I've grouped these a bit. I'd like to preface this by saying in no way is this a naming and shaming exercise. It is totally for contextual purposes. And actually the point of this is, I'm not working with any of these particular people. I have no idea, excuse me, what's going on inside and what's underpinned some of the decisions they've had to make. But we've all seen what it looks like from the outside, and that's actually what matters in the reputation space. So on that top row, for example, you've got 3 businesses that have leveraged delivery or logistics as the core response to COVID-19. The 2 on the left have done it really well. The one on the right, there's been lots of contention around how they've actually managed themselves and their staff relationships, particularly during COVID-19. If you look at health funds and banks, some of them have done a brilliant job. The ones that have linked empathy and action have done a brilliant job. Others have done a beautiful job in the empathy space, but maybe haven't linked it to action. Other brands have been incredibly generous. So Family Zone and Amasim are 2 examples, and you'll have your own personal examples. They gave their product away because they knew their product would be incredibly relevant and important during COVID, because of the new circumstances people found themselves conducting their life under. And so instead of charging for it, they actually stepped up to the plate and found ways to be more meaningful and valuable to their customers. A whole lot of businesses, like those ones in that line that begins with Woolworths, actually just really continued on as normal. They adjusted their offers slightly to reflect the circumstances of COVID and the sorts of experiences that their customers were going to have as a result, but really continued to campaign and have a relatively normal sort of business. And last but not least, the 2 travel ones, you'll feel something for both of them. If you had flights booked with Qantas, like I did, Qantas had to absolutely stop doing or performing their core product or service. They couldn't operate. When you'd argue there's no bigger disruption to your business than that one. And yet the way they handled their customer experience was really clever. They knew they would get inundated and their call centres would be overwhelmed and maybe the experience wouldn't be so good. So quick as a wink, a piece of technology was put up to allow people to self-serve and convert flights to vouchers. They also understood that people would be very worried about the inability to retain their flight status if they couldn't physically fly and do so. So they just, for everybody who had a flight status, they just extended it for 12 months. Flight Centre, unfortunately, has been in the news a lot over that refunds issue and then their backflip because of pressure from the ACCC and from their customers. Those are the sorts of things that moving forward, when people make decisions about buying decisions and who to shop with, who to buy travel from, will stick. They won't just be dismissed as, well, that was, those were things that happened because of the crisis. So that's a very superficial and top line view, but It's the sort of thing that will help build context if you're doing a workshop with people who maybe don't have that sort of understanding of the way that brands work, for instance. I know everybody on this call does. This comes from a beautiful book actually I used to read to my children when they were little. Its purpose here is to act as a cautionary tale, if you like, around uncovering every possible learning and every possible insight that you could have. It's just overwhelming. It's the equivalent of throwing them all up into the tree, no matter how big, how small, how interesting, how passionate you are about them, how important you think they are. If they aren't organised, if there isn't methodology, and if you don't sort of keep momentum in it, then they all kind of end up as this big mess. It becomes overwhelming and no good really comes from the exercise. And it is a real risk when you enter this kind of exercise that's where you'll end up. It's very hard to get the important things down from the tree and hard to see how you might actually put them back into commission. So it is important to have structure, and that's why that little picky is in that spot. Now, this is how the Reputation Continuum sees the world of stakeholders. I mentioned we like simple concepts best. I'm quite simple. We look at 6 key stakeholder groups, and behind each of these hexagons is a number of subgroups, and there's anywhere between 6 and 9 sub-segments sitting behind them. In your organisation or the organisations you're working with, maybe these 6, maybe not all of these 6 apply, and maybe, well, probably very certainly the sub-segments that sit behind each will be very unique to that organisation or business, and that's exactly how it should be. The point of this exercise is to really make sure people have a clear understanding that not all segments are treated equally, and it depends on the crisis, it depends on the moment in the crisis, but it will be unique to your business and to your category and to your crisis at that moment in time. Again, it's part of making sure we keep these things really well organised and delete the ones that aren't relevant. You don't have to have a story or focus on every single one of them, just the ones where you want to achieve an outcome that ladders up to longevity and profitability for your business. If we were in this space, so continuing the methodology thought, if we were in this space and we were doing some work, how would you give context to people for where the sorts of insights or learnings might come from? How to guide that thinking so it doesn't feel like, you know, this big overwhelming task and you don't end up with all the beautiful things stuck in that tree. And I thought I might give you some examples here just for context again. One really important thing here is the difference between capturing every single lesson learned, particularly the ones that relate to process. When we're talking about the reputation space, we really want to talk about the sort of interactions or experiences that people making buying decisions, so customers have with your brand. We're not really that, and it's not that it's not important, but we're not that focused on the process things, the things that customers can't see. By all means, I'm sure that work is going on and should go on, but what we want to do in this sort of space is really keep our thinking on the sorts of things that customers or people thinking about making buying decisions would be exposed to and would therefore make some sort of judgment about whether they think you're good, bad or otherwise, and whether they want to give their preference to you, stay loyal to you or advocate on your behalf. So if we look at, for instance, to start with, if we look at stakeholder group ID and treatment as one of those areas where you can surface learnings that are useful for your forward map. Anybody get emails like this? I got an email from every single business or brand I'd ever had contact with for about the last 10 years. Random physiotherapists, random online shops, whatever. There were hundreds of them. And almost every single one of them said exactly the same thing, and none of it was relevant to me. It was the big, very text heavy, had sort of our COVID-19 response. And that sort of goes back to that thought that not all segments are created equal. So, you know, there's no shame in it if you did, but if you were the sort of, you know, if in your organisation you sent one of those to every single person you had on your database because you felt like that's what you should do, you're in actually very good company. But potentially that's one of the learnings we can take from this, that's how they're viewed. Let's take the next one being engagement, including comms. It's certainly not all about comms, but comms will often be part of it. Did you feel empathy towards brands or organisations that showed you creative of their workers, working from home via Zoom? And that was, COVID-19 has been a very unifying experience, Everybody had to work from home. Almost everybody, of course, some people didn't, but in the main, a lot of people transferred, from working in an office to working from home via Zoom. So this is where some people did a great job turning empathy into action, and others kind of just diverted to empathy to try and make that sort of connection. The other point to make here too is that timing is often not your friend. So I see, and my intention is not to name and shame, it's just for context, but I see that CommBank has just launched some creative with 2 people on Zoom screens. I can't remember what the content is, but it's probably been a few weeks in the making. It takes a while to make a TVC, as many of you know. Because this thing is moving so quickly, really, the sorts of things that take weeks to produce, there's a very real risk that some of that stuff will become redundant either before or soon after it goes live. And that's a really important lesson for us to take out of it. Sounds obvious, but the obvious ones are the best ones, in my opinion. Another good one is experience design and delivery. Now, remember the very overused term of authenticity, but it is an important one. It's really important that things land the right way, and that when people hear this sort of promise or commitment from you, that it rings true and that it's sustainable over time. This was a favourite of mine. I saw this on Urban List way back at the start. Absolutely loved it. We're in this together, say the airlines. Well, when my suitcase is 27 kilos, I was on my own. You have to make sure that it lands as you intend for it to land, and that people don't, automatically find a reason to sort of to see through it, or it doesn't ring true for them. Other examples in the product design or service design and distribution space, lots of people found this great opportunity to completely change their products and service. They delivered them differently. There were different logistics. Others had to stop doing what they were doing. So there are plenty of learnings to be had there. It's important not to lean into the logistics and the process part there. So if you were doing this as an exercise, that's what people do want to sort of get into what they did and why they had to do it as an organisation. And that's really more about projecting who you are and how you want to be seen onto others, versus really understanding how that's actually landed and how that then ladders up to the loyalty and the advocacy that we talked about earlier. In the value proposition space, this is the opportunity to focus on the moments that matter. So this isn't about all the moments. This is about the moments that matter. If it's all the moments, all the things, it's completely irrelevant, and there's a very good chance that you will end up doing nothing with it because it's just too many things, like the beautiful illustration of all those things stuck up in the tree. And the opportunity as well to focus on moments of truth, for that misalignment between what's important to a consumer versus what's important to a company. So this is the kind of space, this is sort of like re-looking at your customer journey map. But I have looked at, and this would just be a cautionary tale as well, feel free to, to re-look at your customer journey map in this space, but it turns this task into a really big thing. It's actually quite hard. I reckon it's really, really difficult to manage, and I think it does actually risk compromising the outcome, but that doesn't mean that re-looking at your customer journey map shouldn't be a step you take afterwards. But certainly from your customer journey map, moments that matter and moments of truth are 2 things to consider when thinking about your value proposition learnings. The people space. So many people made decisions about the way that their people would work, how much their people would work, whether they needed all the people they had to continue to work. We've all heard stories. I'm going to use Australia Post again as an example there, again, just for context. Those decisions will have been made for good reasons, and I'm sure they were very well considered and highly strategic reasons, but how it looks on the other side, how it looks to us from the outside in, is actually what's really important in this space. And last but not least, an example of where to look for insight or lessons learned in the partner space is, did you have the right ones in place? And if you did have the right ones in place, did you enable them to provide the right sort of value? What have you learned about that in the process as well. You'll have, and our model depends on it actually, the Reputation Continuum model depends on people having great PR partners, great research partners, great agency partners, great legal partners. Those people have this incredible specialist expertise that they can bring to you in your time of need to get a fantastic outcome for you. They know you well, they know your business, you know them well, but you have to enable them to do that brilliant work for you. So that was part A. I've spent a bit longer on the way we would work on part A than I'll spend on the other two parts, because it's important to just set up some of those concepts that support the methodology in part A, but we're going to move on to part B. So in part A, what you hope to have happened is you've shaken out a huge amount or surfaced a whole heap of learnings in lots of different spaces that are very relevant to you. And I've given just some examples and some context for how you might do that. In part B, this is about this razor sharp or laser sharp focus on, inputs into your forward strategy. So lovely to have all of the things, but we don't take all of the things forward. So hopefully during part A, you've captured lots of really good stuff, but you've done it in a really organised way. And in part B, you're actually going to triage those and distill them into meaningful inputs. This is something that you learn the hard way, actually, often when you're managing a proper crisis, and certainly when I've worked with people managing crisis, it's the most surprising and the most disappointing. We're all human. Whatever you see in social, let's say, for example, at this moment in time, you're assuming is current. So even if it is something that's been dredged up from the past, perhaps it's something your business or brand did a couple of years ago and it's now only just coming to court, or something new has happened, or there's been a development. Social makes it incredibly easy to dredge it up very specifically, very quickly. And then when busy people come to that space, to the social space, they take what they're seeing as gospel, and they're assuming that what they're seeing and hearing is happening now. And then they evaluate who you are and their experience with you using that as context, which is often very unfair. Actually, you may well have moved on specifically from that time, but that's what people see. They judge you on your past. And in COVID, right now, while we're in the midst of it and while we're coming out of it, there'll be a bit of license. There'll be some empathy or forgiveness for some of the decisions or actions we've taken. But moving forward, fast forward 6 months, fast forward 12 months, when people aren't in that same, when we're not all in it together, then those things may not be viewed in the same way. Won't necessarily be given a free pass because it was what happened during COVID. I want to touch on this concept of crisis license. So COVID-19 was unifying for all the wrong ways, for all the wrong reasons. We were all in it together. It affected everybody in some way or another, and many of us in the same ways. And it required us to behave in certain ways that were entirely appropriate to that moment in time, to our businesses, to our brands, to the way we were delivering our customer experiences. Very understandable, and we were given, a bit of a free pass, if you like. But that crisis license is expiring soon. In some instances, it has expired. And as I've just, finished mentioning, there is no moratorium on reputation, and you can't hibernate it either. So these things will stick. So, casting your mind forward to that lovely place where we're not completely, distracted by COVID-19 and the outcomes of same, the things, those blips, those interactions or experiences that form our reputation continuum, those things will be used to evaluate the way people deal with us moving forward. So it's very important to think about crisis license and what you're going to do as an outcome, which is why our friend Retro needs to come back into the fray, because there'll be some things that have happened that you need to go back and fix. There'll be some things that were entirely appropriate at the time, but in the cold, hard light of sort of post-crisis or even this part of the crisis, need some attention. They need to be rejigged or rescinded or recalibrated or removed. And it is an exercise that is important not to skip. This is a really great tool. Many of you will have used many, many times. When you've got this laundry list of key learnings, you're going to want to run this ruler over them. Okay, so this ruler is the start, stop, continue. They're usually the 3 key steps that people take. Many of you will add the ones that I've added here. They are, well, there's some stuff we want to continue to do, but we want to do it differently now that we have the experience we have and the learnings that we've learned. There are some things we want to do more of. Oh, there's so many wonderful things we want to keep. Someone at the start of this said, they're living their best professional life, which is absolutely fantastic. There are so many good things that have come out of this, and we should never go back. But we really need to keep those good learnings. It's not all gloom and doom and about kind of trying to right the wrongs or fix the stuff that was broken or we could do better. Actually, it's about really hanging on to the things that have made us better brands, better businesses, better employers, better team members, better leaders. And there's some stuff we should do less of as well. Some obvious things we can do less of now, but other things that we've really realised weren't as important potentially, and we didn't like as much as we thought we did, and actually seemed quite redundant to us when push came to shove during COVID. So when we are talking about, let's see what my next slide is, like his little pigeon. When we are talking about the key learnings that we've shaken out in part A, there's a few things that you need to run the ruler over for them. Okay, so the first one is keeping the focus on behaviours that drive trust, loyalty and advocacy. By all means, keep doing all the things you did that laddered up to trust. But if they didn't do any of those 3 things, then those key learnings should be relegated. The second thing was to identify which ones are moments that matter and which ones are moments of truth. So we introduced these concepts in part A, and hopefully they helped guide the sorts of learnings that popped out, that people put up on their post-it notes or the butcher's paper. When we're triaging in part B, we're running the rule over them saying, okay, which ones of those, of all the things, which ones are the moments that matter, which ones are the moments of truth? Some are really small and cumulative, others are big and obvious. The third thing we want to do in this part of the workshop, if we were going to do it, is we want to triage actions and decisions by whether they, what is the opportunity, what's the fit of the opportunity, and what's the timing, what's the right sort of timing of that opportunity. And you want to triage those against the backdrop of profit and longevity. Okay, so again, I'm not saying you shouldn't capture the nice to haves, the points of interest, the things that people are passionate about, but it's really important to have that laser sharp focus on the things that drive profitability and longevity. And so what you're getting is this really kind of nice sort of, funnel effect. It helps make sense of what can otherwise be a big and gnarly task. I've got this other gorgeous storybook that I like to use as a metaphor in presentations sometimes. It's called Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. So you can imagine if a pigeon gets trapped on a bus, it flaps around a lot inside the bus. It's very distracting. You can't avoid it, but you would no sooner give that pigeon the steering wheel than fly to the moon. You would try and catch the pigeon and return it to its rightful space. The metaphor in this instance is there will be certain things that you surface that are the flappy pigeon. There'll be certain things that just for one reason or another, maybe it's somebody's personal preference, or maybe it's because there was an outcome on a customer level or a business level that was, really quite extreme. And so that gives it more credibility, if you like, or more priority in the process when it doesn't deserve it. So it might deserve a seat on the bus, but just be really mindful about where it goes. So just watch out for pigeons. It's just a good tip normally, watching out for pigeons. And then what we like to do next, so step 5 is to apply the dreams test. Okay, so for all of those key learnings that you've now started to push through those loops and started to simplify or refine down, you're now going to apply this test. You're going to work out whether they're differentiating. So are they things that actually you do differently in a positive way to others? Are they relevant? So they might be different, but they've actually got to be relevant to the customers, to the people either making or considering making buying decisions. They need to be meaningful, so not just relevant, but actually meaningful. Because if they're not meaningful, then they won't be motivating. And motivating, of course, is this thing we need to, see something, do something. And they have to be sustainable. Ideally, they won't be one-off or inauthentic, not some sort of offer that just seems too good to be true or is very temporary. not really at your core purpose. And I think a really important thing to do after you do the dreams test is to triage again the things that have made it through that gate based on feasibility. Okay, is it a now fix or is it a later fix? Is it something you need to focus on now or focus on later? Second to last is the idea of actually then looking at or evaluating all of these learnings against your purpose. Okay, how true to your purpose are they? Are they guided? Are you being guided by your values? Is it purpose led? Sometimes, if they're not perfectly aligned with your purpose, it's not a reason to not pursue them or to discard them. It's just a really important part of the exercise, because often what you'll find is the things that are really meaningful and really important and will drive the most value moving forward are the ones that are most closely linked or aligned with your purpose. The very last step to take in this part of the workshop, if you were going to do it, is to make sure that you don't lose any momentum and backseat the changes. So, you know, a great workshop tool that many of you are probably familiar with is, you know, the card system, whereby you really clearly, because you've had the benefit of being in the zone with the key people in the room, make sure you clearly clarify what it is that you want to do, what you're going to do with it, what the outcome is going to be, when you're going to do it, how, so all the things we just talked about, and then who's going to do it, and somebody in that workshop takes it from the room and actually progresses it in the organisation. It's not the person who gathers up all the butcher's paper with the post-it notes at the end and folds them away, all this amazing, beautiful work you did, which gets backseated because the minute you walk outside the room, the real world just hits you and it's just super, super full on. So we've just been through part B, okay, of the workshop. So part A, we had to talk about the concepts as well and then start to surface the learnings. In part B, we really started to push those through a really narrow funnel so that we could keep that focus and alignment on business strategy and our forward plan. In part C, we're going to look at how going through this exercise really helps to really sharpen up your crisis management plan, because it means that you will not only be more able to manage the remainder of COVID-19, and we don't really know how long that's going to go on for, and what sort of new, nuances and waves are going to come, but also any other business challenges or crises moving forward. So if we move on to part C is all about preparedness, okay? So lack of preparedness is really one of the key things that people have come unstuck with in dealing with COVID. It's totally reasonable to assume that we didn't see something like COVID-19 coming. I mean, that really did come out of the blue and hit hard and fast. That's typical of a crisis. This one happened to be called COVID-19, but, that's the way crises work, unfortunately. If you want to play devil's advocate for a minute, it's not ridiculous to assume that we could have had some major infectious disease outbreak at some point in our future. It happens overseas all the time. History has shown us that we've had these kinds of ones in the past, and preparedness for that kind of thing may well have helped us with this very specific thing when it hit hard and fast. The beautiful thing about going through this sort of experience is, we do have the opportunity to learn from it. It's kind of a tough lesson to learn, super painful for some. Others have prospered incredibly well, and I'm so glad for the companies that have, and my heart really goes out to the people who've suffered and actually had to close their doors. But for everything in between, the opportunity to learn from this and to take that learning and drive it into a new level of preparedness for whatever is next, because there will be a next. Maybe that next is just a really amazing challenge. Recently I was working with someone who is in the export space, and of course that world has turned on its head, and if you've got a perishable product and your export market and your method of delivery is shut, that's a crisis, right? And that's the sort of thing that could happen at any time. It's happened. I don't have a client in the live sheep trade, but we've had those issues with the live sheep trade in the past that are not related to COVID. So these sorts of things can happen at any time. So call them what you would like, but the same set of methodologies, the same approach will help guide you through navigating your way through them. Preparation really is the most powerful weapon. If you are building crisis management plans, it's not about spending all this time building beautiful, completely well-considered, comprehensive plans that you then stack up on a shelf in your office and feel good. And, oh, fantastic, crisis 2C has turned up. We just get that file down, and that would be a completely wasted exercise. You know, it really would. I'm sure anybody can see that. Preparation is not about trying to have the answer or a specific plan for every kind of scenario. It's about actually developing a response framework, if you like, a way that actually enables you to get the sort of specific response to whatever it is that you face at that moment in time up really quickly in a really comprehensive way to minimise disruption to your business and to minimise the commercial impact that can happen. You wouldn't want to argue with Mike. I wouldn't want to argue with Mike. You can have the most beautiful plan in the world, but then something like COVID-19 comes along and you get a punch in the face and all of a sudden, all bets are off. So this is why having a framework and a way of actually getting the right people together and doing the right things is really important, and that you have the right sort of navigation in place to make that happen. This is another thing that we use often when we're in this sort of phase of being more prepared for next time and looking at the lessons learned about the internal risk factors. So mostly when companies fail in the moments that matter, so set COVID-19 aside, whenever you have some sort of crisis or something that doesn't go well for you, reputation-wise, it's not usually because you don't have amazing people in your business, and it's not usually because you don't have amazing partners, the ones we talked about before, the research, the agency, the legal, the PR. Usually really great people are in place. Often what happens is it's the lack of preparation, because we all just get busy with what we need to do in the normal day-to-day. Either there is no process at all, or the process that is in place is a very restrictive process and not fit for purpose, so not match fit. The ability to pivot, no matter what people say, most people are very slow-moving beasts. Most organisations are very slow-moving beasts. And you have to be able to move in any direction, and you have to be able to do that with pace and keep that momentum going. It's incredibly difficult to do. And you do have to enable your partners, the right set of partners, to be able to support you. I spend a lot of time working in agencies, and unfortunately for me, once or twice I did hear people, actually I heard it more on client side. On client side, people sometimes are quick to blame their partners for certain outcomes, and I'm the first one in there to say, well, your partners are only able to do as good a job as you actually enable them to do. You certainly can't blame others for what's happened, and you really do need to approach it as being in all it together. We have this cute little readiness quiz on our site. You can do it. It's interactive. It's kind of fun. It'll spit out a response for you. But the sorts of things or the sorts of questions, if you sit down and ask someone about, they will often not have ready answers to this, which in turn is a very good indicator of a lack of preparedness. And you're not alone. It's a really common one if this is something that you feel in your organisation or business. The first thing we do when we start to talk about preparedness is how many of the sort of top 3 to 5 events or issues you could list that would cause immediate disruption to your business. And they're not always the most obvious ones, and they are usually quite unique to a particular business organisation. The second question we ask is, okay, you might have brilliant teams in place with incredible skill sets, so definitely the capability to handle this kind of thing, but what about the capacity? So many challenges in this space, and COVID-19 is a great example, they just poleaxe you. They happen without warning, and everybody's completely distracted. Business as usual is completely disrupted, and yet it needs to be able to continue on. If your team have the capacity to deal with that, I think you really seriously need to ask the question about how they're spending their time normally. This is why it usually is something that you need help with, or that people need help with, because they might have the skills in-house or not, but they certainly don't have the capacity because they're scrambling to try and keep the rest of the ship floating, keep everybody else afloat. The third thing we talk about is nimbleness. And this is about having that framework for a response or a strategic plan in place that really comprehensively covers or has a comprehensive guide as to how to action these sorts of things quickly in a meaningful way with all of the key stakeholder groups that are relevant in that moment to that crisis or challenge. The next thing we look at is support at exec and or board level. You can't move quickly and decisively in the right direction if you're then going to have to spend heaps of time bringing your exec and or your board up to speed. So we mentioned this earlier about the need to have those discussions at board level so that you are actually empowered, that they understand what's going on, they have the information they need, and you are actually empowered to make decisions and act decisively within an agreed framework quickly in response to a challenge or a crisis. And last but not least, data and intel. This is where your brilliant research company really come into their own. Not the only place they do, particularly this place, because you need to, when you're having to move that fast, you need really accurate data and intel. You need to be able to access it fast to validate decision making. We're coming very close to the end here, so I hope people have got questions for me when we get to the other side. But a really nice way of looking at this whole crisis management methodology is as an infinity loop. So right now you could argue we are somewhere around, you know, sort of here. So coming out of this active crisis management phase and into the recovery planning phase, assuming you do that really well, you actually then achieve this lovely comprehensive preparation that then prepares you for whatever happens next, because this, as we mentioned, is our current crisis, COVID-19, but it's not your next crisis. So you can see the relationship of the three working together. So that was part C. So we talked about doing a workshop, having a methodology that worked in 3 parts. The first part was capturing your actionable insights. The second part was triaging those so they were really closely aligned to your business strategy. And the last part was saying, well, we've learned so much from this, we would be so much better prepared for the next time something like this cropped up. And this is how we're actually going to do that when we're not all in it together. So I've come to the end of what I wanted to share with you. If you want to talk more about this, I'm super happy to. I love a chat. Anybody who knows me knows that. Love a chat. Very happy to have a coffee and a conversation with anybody who would like to. We can help. So at the start I said there's a couple of things I hope you get out of this. If you've just had a really nice opportunity to have some clear space and just to think about these sorts of things for 40 minutes or so, then I'm thrilled. That's great, because that's often the sort of value that I take out of these sorts of presentations. If I can help you, if you would like to do this sort of thing with your own team or within your own organisation, I can actually set you up to do that yourself, because I know there's many people on this call that have those beautiful skills and the experience and will be able to do that brilliantly. If you would like me to come and do that in your organisation, either because you don't have the capability, or you do but you just don't have the capacity, I'm really happy to do that as well. And there's more information on our website. So I will stop screen sharing and I will stop talking as well. And if you have any questions, I'm really happy to answer them.
Thanks, Erin. I've certainly got a few questions. But one thing before I launch the first question, and for those of you who do have a question, just make a little note in the chat box and I'll hand over to you for your question. Firstly, I know that quite often it is the comms and the marketing people who have to bring the workshops together, and one of the things I found was that it was really important to get an external facilitator so that I could be a part of the conversation and not be worrying about the process of the meeting. So just anyone who is thinking of doing a bit of a workshop like this, I think first of all I'd highly recommend getting Erin in to facilitate that process, so that your brains and your genius sitting at the table as a marketing person or internal comms executive or whatever it might be, as a CEO, you're very much a part of the meeting, but it's being managed by the facilitator in terms of the process. But one question I did have, Erin, is that who would you recommend to be a part of the workshop? You talked about this being something that is not just a comms issue. It's much wider than that. So what kind of, who should we have from the executive seats in our organisations if we're not working necessarily with a board?
Yeah, well, and it's not often who you expect either. So I'm going to give you an example. So in one I did recently, you do need some C-suite. So you do need, ideally you wouldn't have them all. You want quite a diverse group of people, because remember, you're talking about when you want this alignment and shared language, you do want diversity in the group doing the workshop, so that you've got all of the sorts of perspectives that you need to surface the right sort of issues and the insights that come with them. In this particular example, we recommended, and this person was incredibly valuable, was the head of their call centre. Now, the head of their call centre wouldn't traditionally have sat in a strategic workshop, but that head of call centre was at the coalface. They were seeing how many calls, how emotional people were feeling about, things, how many of each kind of issue was being surfaced, how tricky it was for their people in the call centre, so on the front line, to deal with it, how that was showing up in social, because they had a link between the call centre and social, which is a great way to operate. So you want to have a relatively small number of people. Like, you would be trying to keep it to, you want to keep it under 10 for sure, otherwise it's way too cumbersome. But you also want to make sure that you have representatives from all of the areas of your business that could bring insight, and therefore also would be responsible potentially for, actioning solutions, all those parts of the business. So definitely someone from marketing, ideally someone from coalface, so the people who are right, out in front of it, so call centre and or someone from your social team. Definitely, if you've got EGMs, the person who's actually in charge of operations and logistics. Often someone from the channel or distribution part of your business. So it's always going to depend. It's the person sort of facilitating this is usually going to be someone in that marketing space, because we're the ones who really understand not just the value, but the impact of not getting it right in the customer experience space. But certainly you want all the people who have got something meaningful to contribute, and it's often not the most obvious, I think. So don't fill it full of, if you felt like your whole marketing team needed to go through this, you do that as a follow-up. You would actually then, and that is one of the options at the end of this, so you can do this workshop, and then what you can do is say, look, there's actually another whole layer or another whole group in our organisation who would benefit from going through this. Them going through it is much more efficient, because you'll actually you're not starting from scratch with them. You're going to take what you've learned as an input into that, and they're actually going to expand and refine that, rather than actually kind of, go back to the beginning. And that's often incredibly valuable as well.
And what kind of time frame should we be setting aside? Is it a sort of morning session? It really would take quite a period of time, if not a series of meetings, I guess.
It does take, I think, you don't want to be doing it for more than about half a day, because I think you just lose momentum. I think with these sorts of things, people just get fatigued very quickly. And remember too, people are incredibly busy. They just don't have the sort of time to take out of it. It can be really effectively done in about half a day, so long as there is really good preparation. That's the key to it. You really want someone, not that person isn't necessarily responsible for doing all the preparation, but certainly coordinating it, so that when you do come into those, so in the same way I did, I shared some contextual things, like here's where you might start, here's a bit of a scene setter, here's a whatever. If you can do that level of preparation, so people just aren't starting with blank sheets of paper, it's just good workshop, just good workshop, hygiene really. That certainly makes that half day, really productive. But I reckon a half day. I've been in many that have been longer for many different things, not just for this. And you just the quality of input and outcome deteriorates, and then people are distracted because they've got to get back to doing things. And in a crisis, or when you've got major business challenge, people are busier than ever. People are scrambling. And you don't want to compromise the opportunity to actually, really get the right outcomes from this sort of
exercise. Is it a good idea to bring in some of the partners that you're working with as well? Or
Yeah, I think so. If you're in a partnership structure, so quite a flat structure, certainly key ones. Look, I honestly would treat partners like I treat influencers. You know, you want to pick the right ones, the ones that either have the most to contribute or have the most sway, or you just think are going to be most comfortable in that environment. And so great contributors and then great champions of action when you come out. Certainly it's important to include people like that, because otherwise that will contribute to backseating the action plan, because having to bring those people along when they haven't been through the experience is difficult. But if you had a partnership structure of 14 partners, you wouldn't want 14 in there, obviously, which I know is not what you're suggesting. You'd only want maybe one, you know, depending on how many other people in there. That's also incredibly empowering. If you've got, and I've seen this lots of times too, if you have someone who's relatively junior but has this incredible insight to contribute, and that will often be someone like the person leading your social team. They are the absolute coalface of what's going on. It's important to make sure they don't feel intimidated when they're in that sort of space, but for that kind of exchange or interaction, for those insights from those two kind of, you know, very different parts of the organisational structure often lead to really amazing outcomes.
Brilliant, thanks, Erin. And anyone else got questions? Very conscious that I'm hogging Erin. Feel free to jump on. Otherwise, certainly it's been really insightful and a really useful framework. I think that one of the things that is really difficult is that what happens is that we quite often fall back into the next stage of our operational planning and execution, and we don't take the time out to really, you know, consider the lessons learned, and don't necessarily apply those important aspects around profitability and purpose and the fit. You know, I'm just thinking, you know, I've got some really useful aspects there for us to actually really measure what we want to hold on to and keep and what we want to let go of. Certainly with BWA, we doubled the amount of events than we normally would, put them all online and made them free. Now that's not a sustainable thing going forward. So we need to think, we want to do more online, but we need to now think about what how do we package that, and how do we price it up, and how do we deliver it in a way that is going to meet a greater market need. So we really learnt a lot as an organisation, as I'm sure so many other organisations did, you know, by pushing forward their digitisation of their businesses. But I'd be interested to hear what other people how have they handled it? What are your thoughts about this? And we've got some incredible expertise on this Zoom meeting, and it'd be great for us to hear from you as to what your insights were around the COVID. Perhaps, Jude, do you want to share your thoughts?
I can share thoughts on most things, though.
Well, how about you tell us what I'm really interested in, Jude, is, I mean, you're over in Melbourne. What are the sorts of things that you've seen in the responses and the lessons learned as a result of what's happened so far, and how that could inform what organisations are doing going forward?
Look, I would say I've been in a very fortunate position working for Lifeblood, which, for those of you who don't know, was the Red Cross blood service, and now we're the Red Cross Lifeblood. So we are the blood arm of the Red Cross. So we're not involved in humanitarian. They've had a whole raft of issues to deal with. I think for us, we've been very lucky that people responded very positively as soon as pandemic conditions hit. I think, like for everyone, for the first couple of weeks, things were changing so much for us on a personal level, on a workplace level. We really didn't know what was going to happen. We've been very fortunate that people have continued to donate blood, and if anything, sometimes we've had too much blood, which is a problem to have, but still a problem for us. I think, and, you know, and probably everyone has noticed this. You know, for us, it was very fortunate because a lot of the things that people were leaning into initially, these ideas of kindness, pandemics, and doing good, and were things that fit very naturally with our brand and our purpose and what we do. I think it seemed for a while that if any bit of advertising was running that hadn't taken that into consideration, or any bit of comms really outside, not just advertising, it seemed really jarring. I think it felt like some people got on board with things like it's like they workshop too much around, like, we've got to make our message fit this stuff. Let's find ways to talk about how we're kind, and it almost seemed a little bit forced. That was something I really noticed, that you kind of look at things and go, oh, maybe it's a bit too soon, guys. But we're in the very fortunate position of people responding well. I mean, where we really had to focus lots of energy was on reassuring people around health and safety. We are a very highly trusted brand, but there were a lot of people working really hard to make sure that we didn't lose any of that trust with people, particularly around our donor centres, around social distancing, all of those things. It's not to say we've had an easy ride of it, but we've come out pretty well, I would say.
That's thanks for sharing that, Jude. It's really insightful, actually, in terms of the different sectors and the different organisations and how they responded. Michelle, what were your observations, and what are the things that you've noticed? I know you're heading into a portfolio board career, so as a potential board member, what are the sorts of things that you'd be sort of thinking are going to be important going forward?
I think it was a really interesting time as a board member for a few reasons. The first observation I made is how critical it was to make sure that as board members we were very clear on what was going on in our organisation. We were very clear on what the response plan within the organisation was, and that would be different for every organisation. But I think most importantly is that we stepped back and we didn't get too involved. We had to empower the executive to move forward and implement the plans that needed to be prioritised. But we needed to do it in a way that we were there to support them. So it was a really fine balance, in my view, from a board perspective, to provide the support and the direction and where necessary, strategic input, to do it in a way where you are seen to be actively contributing at the right level, but you're not interfering. Because in a crisis situation, there's a lot going on. There are a lot of decisions that need to be made. And you need to let your executive do that. You've got to empower them to do that. So ensuring that you've got the right framework for decisions and you're very clear on what the board's involvement needs to be. And it has meant, in all of the boards I'm involved with and the committees I'm involved with, a lot more time has had to be committed, a lot of Zooming, a lot of WebExes, a lot more frequent engagement as a board member than you would normally have outside of a crisis, but short, sharp, very clear on what decisions have to be made, and then letting the exec get on and do it. And the operations team, not just the exec, of course.
That's, I think a lot of boards have been finding that's been exactly how they've experienced this, and then spending the time now as a board to really reflect on that and say, well, what did we do really well, and and how do we hold on to that? I think.
Yeah. I think that's spot on as well. And Erin referenced this a few times, talking within the framework that she works with, the triaging piece as we come out of this, and reprioritising and getting very clear on what we should hang on to and what we shouldn't, and what we need to do differently as a result of what we've learned. I think from a board perspective, I know that that's something I'm going to be very focused on raising and making sure it stays on top of the agenda, so that opportunities are not lost, the learnings are not lost, because there's been a lot of learnings with the organisations that I'm involved with, that's for sure. I guess that the other thing that I would point out through any kind of crisis is that getting back to what becomes the new normal and moving forward at the appropriate pace is really important. I sense in some organisations there's fatigue, because it's been so full on in order to address the situations that arose as a result of COVID-19 and to ensure that our people are safe, our customers are safe. I think one of the really important pieces moving forward and coming out of this from a learning perspective is that we don't lose momentum, but we respect the fact that our teams are fatigued, and we need to manage that very carefully and appropriately.
I reckon that's a really good point, because pace is a very important thing. It doesn't necessarily mean go fast. You know, it's the fabulous Natalie Jenkins is here from Block. Block's doing some really good work in this space too, aren't they, Nat? Because you sort of built a product that, well, from what I have seen of it, looks like it sort of came about, you know, in response to a need, but actually has really gotten some great momentum on its own. I don't know if you'd be willing to share.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thanks for that lovely feedback and intro, Erin. And I really enjoyed that session, actually taking lots of notes as I do and reflecting on what it is that we're doing in here at Block, but also the boards that I sit on, as well as that Michelle's mentioned. I mean, I think, I'm assuming you're talking about Mind the Gap, which is the brand screening service that we launched. Yeah, and look, that was a really interesting one, because we, like every business, had to look at what is happening at the time and what is going to happen going forward, and we're a business to business. So we're dealing with other businesses, and sort of knowing that unlike some sectors like the arts sector, the tourism sector, the hospitality sector, that were completely shuttered straight away, for a lot of us that are working with businesses, the delay is going to be the really painful road ahead, I think. So it was interesting observation, watching what was happening within our own business with our clients. You know, certainly a lot of clients, government clients sort of put things on hold, or big corporates put things on hold, because it was all about where our budget's going to need to be redirected to. So projects, and our projects are generally very long-term, on hold. And then there was a whole lot of small to medium businesses that pivoted because they had to, purely to survive. So then they actually needed to go through a very quick process of, branding something that's completely new that they've created. So, and then there was those that had projects that were stalled and then came back online again, because it provided an opportunity, like in the kind of building sector or retail sector, where actually some long-term projects, because things had slowed down, this is a good time to continue with some of those things. So what we did was actually do some work out there with a whole lot of clients in trying to work with them as to what is the gap that they might be seeing in the future, and what do they need to do from a kind of stakeholder communications perspective to ensure that they're not falling in the gap, I suppose, with their brand in what is a time, as you said, that's kind of quite chaotic for a lot of people. So we worked with different clients on that, and the things that we found were really interesting, because it's what Lynn mentioned about that need to digitally embrace everything straight away, and then what that means for the business in the long term. So a lot of and we were talking government, kind of not-for-profit, and sort of small to medium businesses here. We're going, what does that mean for us? How do we grasp that very, very quickly? And then what does that mean going forward, because it's impacted our business structure? All of that stuff. And I love that little cartoon you put up about the brand stuff, because the mistakes that people were seeing and that they didn't want to make, but inadvertently did, and fell in that gap at the time. So that's what we were doing with our brand screening service, saying, what are your goals, business goals? Where are you at the moment? And how much of those communications with that having an impact on what you're trying to achieve from your brand? Because exactly what you said earlier, things get remembered that happen in a crisis. So it's not just the now, it's what happens in 2 years' time that took place now. So it's been quite interesting with those different groups, looking at how they can respond and what help they need just simply to move forward, I think.
And Christy's been in the emergency response team. How's that been?
Oh, look, I mean, as I said earlier, it's been professionally, I've been living my best life working on the emergency response group. But I mean, literally just before COVID hit, we launched a brand new employee communication app. So we've got about 15 to 16,000 staff members across the whole of Australia, and the majority of them are nurses, obviously. So they're not sitting at a desk, they don't have access. So we now have a way of reaching them all. And in the short space of between March and now, we've astronomically grown our registrations on the app. So we're now reaching more than 50% of our workforce in that short period of time. So there's that indication that people are wanting the information we're providing them with. They're looking, we always try and balance our stories with good news stories as well. We've got some fantastic stories about, our intellectually disabled cohort of clients that are now WhatsApping each other with emojis, and, they're able to reach out and get the connect that they need rather than waiting for someone to come to them for a meeting. And, just really lovely little stories that we've been able to pepper through with also the managing of anxiety, the building of our ICU capacities, the critical care upskilling, all our workforce having to get more training and that sort of stuff. And to Michelle's point about fatigue, what we're seeing now is people are like, I'm over COVID, don't want to hear about it anymore. But yeah, we've got ANZICS, which is our critical care service across Australia and New Zealand, are saying, well, our second wave's due. It's going to come. It's going to be towards the end of June, early July. So we've got to keep preparing our ICUs for that maximum capacity. We've got to keep making sure that our workforce is upskilled and able to care for a second wave of people, because we're all going to be more respiratory challenged during the winter season. And so we're going to find that all these people who are asymptomatic may become symptomatic and, may present as actually COVID positive. So there's so many different elements and layers to all of this, and all of our lessons learned have been around exceptional leadership, strong and transparent communications, giving people access to good news as well as the news that they have to know. So they're kind of our sort of key lessons. But the framework you've just run us through now is going to be so helpful for me, because we are literally going into our lessons learned from our pandemic management and moving into our recovery phase. So this is going to be really great for me to take to our group. So thank you.
Okay, we're coming to the end of our time here. We're so thankful to you, Erin, for taking the time out and to so generously share your IP and your framework and your expertise. It has been a really good opportunity, as you said, to take just that moment out to think about all our own organisations and what we're doing, each one of us in such a different area. And it really is important to have this time to reflect. Ladies, we'd love to see more of you. Business Women Australia has everything online at the moment. We are going back to face-to-face for some states, but we're going to maintain a very extensive online opportunity for women to have these high-level conversations, to have boardroom banters, roundtable discussions and masterminds where we really do share our knowledge and have the opportunity to really learn from each other. So I'd love to see some of you consider, if you are interested in jumping online more often and perhaps even joining Business Women Australia. It'd be awesome.